Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer some upper tier patron emails. This first email is from upper tier patron Austin from Texas, which is kind of a funny scenario. He says, I emailed some time back asking you for a recommendation on learning about avoidant attachment, and you recommended I listen to the attachment deep dive that you made, and I finally finished listening to it. And I wanted to say thanks. The episodes were so insightful and engaging. I learned so much about myself, my attachment style, and my relationship. I found a lot of comfort in understanding my avoidant style and how I can better get in touch with what's going on with me. It also provided a ton of insight into my relationship, and I loved sharing everything I learned with my girlfriend, and we were able to discuss our attachment styles and how they work together. So again, thank you so much. Just chiming in here. Yeah, me too. Attachment theory has helped me understand almost every relationship and every conflict that I have ever been in and ever will be. It's a powerful concept, not only with my wife, but also with my work relationships, my family relationships, my relationship with myself. All my distortions can be explained, conceptualized through attachment theories, understanding of hurt and fear of rejection and abandonment, and our desire to be close to other people and how normal that is. There's a lot of gender in this as well. The toxic masculinity is, I think, can be explained through attachment theory. When you understand the depth of it, when you understand the full, rich theory, not the way that is typically talked about on the internet on the surface level. So yeah, I agree, Austin. Going on with your email here. I did have a follow-up question, though. Based on your pointers in the deep dive, I started to wonder and hypothesize about the attachment styles of my friends. I was wondering, is that an unhealthy or unethical thing to do, to wonder about my friends' attachment styles? My motivation is to help develop better attachments with them, and I thought understanding their attachment styles better may help me develop more secure attachments. Just chiming in here, no, it's not unhealthy necessarily or unethical for you to wonder about your friends' attachment styles. I do that all the time. I could rattle off the top of my head every single person that I know well enough about my hypothesis, or I might literally know because I've talked with them about it, about their attachment styles. And not just like of the 4 categories, but I would have pretty elaborate discussions. Like of my wife, for example, I can tell you very precisely how I conceptualize her attachment style. And when you look on the internet or you talk with some people, they'll be like, that's unethical. You can't diagnose. Well, 1, it's not diagnosing. But 2, even if it was diagnosing, I can't not see things. Once I see something, once I understand how to see something, I can't turn that off. I'm going to notice, especially if it's critical to my attachment survival, and it's what we do with it, right? Even if I were to know that my wife had dysthymia or something, it's what I do with it. And I think what people assume when you're talking in public is that diagnoses are used to attack people or to put people down or discount them or stigmatize them. And no, that's not what diagnoses are inherently for. They are used that way sometimes, or assumed to be that way sometimes. But when I have a friend and I will hypothesize or talk with them about their attachment style, I'm using it for good. I'm trying to help them. I'm trying to help our relationship. I'm trying to better understand them. Now, you, I guess, could talk to my friends to see if I'm succeeding in that, but it's what we do with the information that is important. And I can imagine some of you who have listened to the deep dive on attachment and all the other discussions I've talked about attachment theory. And I can imagine you being a greater expert on attachment theory than most clinicians are. Because attachment theory is understood by most clinicians, kind of, but not to the level that you probably understand it at this point. And all the nuances and the depth to it and the power of it and the amount of situations that it applies to and the way that it looks, all the education that you've had on this podcast and maybe elsewhere. So it's a powerful idea that you can actually share with people if you use it for good, if you use it with people who are willing to have you use it with them. For example, I might say have a student of mine who is having a particular reaction to me, and we have a relationship that is elaborate, meaning I might work with them over the span of a couple years or something. And without consciously registering it, I will have noted some of their attachment reactivity. and will probably react from that. I might consciously register. I might consciously think, oh, I think they have maybe this reactivity, because it's important for me to know that so that I can navigate the relationship with them, make them feel safe. So let's go on here. That leads me to my second question. If I suspect others have certain attachment styles, are there things I can do depending on their specific attachment style to help develop a more secure relationship? For example, if I thought a friend is avoidant, should I try extra hard to reassure them that I care about our relationship and I want to have a strong connection with them? End of email. Absolutely. You hit it right on the head there, Austin. That is what I would do. For example, if I had a friend who was preoccupied, well, I'll just talk about Bob. He will identify as disorganized. And so one of the strategies that I have with them is to make him feel safe with me and to be honest with him, and also to connect with him, because him and I, we can be friends and surface, and we can have fun, and we can even have some deep conversations, but it won't be really deep, and there won't be like a real connection. It'll be, just kind of surfacey stuff. Probably not compared to other people, surfacey stuff, but surfacey stuff for him and me. And so I can fall into that pattern, but I know, and I'll be mostly okay with it because for me, I trust that behind the surfacey stuff is someone that cares about me and loves me. But for Bob, towards me, I know that he needs deeper connection and deeper vulnerability and more authenticity, more overt messages and experiences between us that demonstrate that he truly can trust me and that I am on his side and that I do care about him and that I am paying attention to the real him, not the fake him, the butler him, you know what I mean? The him that he puts on to please other people. I have to spend effort to break through that. And it's not hard for me to do, but if I didn't know to do that, I would just stay kind of surfacey with him, and we would have deep conversations compared, I think, to most people, but it wouldn't be on the level that would, I think, make him feel a little bit more secure. Now, I actually don't have any delusion that he feels super secure with me even, because I know that for him, his pain runs pretty deep and his worries run pretty deep. So even with me in the depth of our relationship, which I would consider to be pretty deep, it, I think, only gets partially into his material and into his worries and his stuff. But that's one example. Or if I had an avoidant friend like you're talking about, you're saying try extra hard to reassure them that you care about the relationship. Yeah. So another thing you can do is, if you have avoidant friends or people in your life, is when they seem like they don't care and they might be kind of blowing you off, that might be a tactic of theirs to avoid vulnerability. But deep down, they're hoping that you chase them. Avoidant people want you to chase them. Now, you can certainly say to them, I don't like chasing you. I want to just be with you. And it kind of hurts me when you give me, I sometimes get the impression like you don't care about a relationship, but I suspect that you actually do. So you might give them a chance to kind of come out of their avoidant shell. You might even explain avoidant attachment style to them. I don't know. Case by case basis, Now, can you use attachment theory with your friends in a way that will harm people? Yeah, it happens all the time. I see it online all the time. Someone will be like, oh my God, you're so preoccupied, knock it off. You're so clingy. And I've diagnosed you with preoccupied attachment, anxious attachment. Read about it, and stop it. And yeah, that happens as well. But, obviously y'all aren't going to do anything like that, right? All right, this next email is from Anonymous Annual Upper Tier Patron. She says, I just finished listening to your rerun discussing patron Jenny's experience with having sex with her therapist. Can you compare and contrast the situation of a therapist having sex with their client versus a master's thesis advisor at a university attempting to have sex with his master's student? Both situations have power differentials. Can you also compare and contrast the possible damage, both short-term and long-term, of the client and the student? P.S. The situation I'm referring to was non-consensual. It might be interesting to hear the possible effects for a non-consensual student versus a consensual student. End of email. Well, I could talk about this for days, but in brief, what I'll say is that the experience of a student with an advisor that non-consensually let's see, what do you say? A therapist having a master's thesis advisor at university attempting to have sex. So if I heard about a situation of a master's thesis advisor, a university professor advisor, attempting to have sex with a master's student non-consensually, I mean, that's sexual assault. So that is absolutely traumatizing. I mean, I don't know how to compare and contrast, because each of these scenarios involve someone in authority. Each of these scenarios could be vastly traumatic for the victim, and each of these scenarios could be not so traumatic, depending on the situation, depending on how the victim felt in the situation. You know, a lot of trauma and the lasting effects of trauma depends on how we are feeling about it at the time. And for whatever reason, factors, case-by-case basis, or just resiliency or something, individuals experiencing this kind of attention could experience it with a lot of terror and a lot of fear and a lot of upset, a lot of difficult emotions. And another person might experience it as annoying or aggravating. So it just kind of depends. It depends on where we come from. It depends on how we're interpreting the situation. It depends on a lot of other factors. Like if a master's thesis advisor texts you and says, "Hey, I'd like to meet up for drinks sometime," that's different than if you're in his office and he is between you and the door and he's looming over you and he, I don't know, takes off his pants or I won't go down the road to make it graphic, so it won't be triggering, but there's a lot of different circumstances, and the same is true with a therapist. If a therapist were to have sex with a client, there's too many factors that vary the experience for the victim to even contrast those two scenarios. So all I'll say is that an advisor at a university non-consensually attempting to have sex with a master's student can be one of the most traumatic experiences you go through, even though society won't recognize that. There's a power differential, obviously. There is a lot of power that advisors have over your life in ways that really are superseding of a therapy relationship. I've had advisors myself as a student who had complete control over my academic career, over my professional career, over my reputation, over my life. When people get their master's degrees, they're usually pouring tens of thousands of dollars into it, maybe even over $100,000 into it. They're pouring years of their time. They have to sacrifice a lot. They have to pull time away from work and their family and maybe even their own kids, their own self-care. And they usually are hoping for a career, and there's just so much involved. And an advisor, a professor, can completely make or break your life. And you know that as a student. So an advisor that does that to you, it could be really, really awful. All right, this next email is from Anonymous Upper Tier Patron. She says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. I was just listening to an episode where you said that family therapists tend to be more child-oriented, and that can affect their biases. Just chiming in here. Did I say that? Because I could imagine myself saying that, but I think more specifically what I might have said, or what at least I think, is that with my students, my family therapy students, I would run a test, if you will, by giving them a scenario, a vignette, or having them watch a clip of something, and then I would have them silently write about their reaction to it, who they thought was wrong, who they thought needed to change, who they thought might be a victim, that kind of thing. And I would find that some people would side with one person, maybe the parents, and some people would side with the kid. And maybe I might have said that most of the time, this is just anecdotal, that the students would side with the child, but some people would side with the parents, especially if those people were parents themselves, or if they grew up with a difficult sibling, right? And they watched their parents suffer at the behavior of the difficult sibling, and so they are more biased towards parents. More conservative people are more biased towards parents, that kind of thing. So that's the full way I would describe it. And I would do this as a way of helping the students understand that they had a bias, that they had a tendency to see things in a certain way. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that they have a bias and that their point of view isn't the point of view. And when they look around the room and they see that other people see the same situation, and see it differently, it is I hope it's helpful for them to understand that each person has a particular way of looking at things, and each person is not right. It's just helpful to consider. And this is why we consult, particularly when we're beginning as a therapist, because we can be completely lost in our own ideas about things, and you need to hear other people's perspectives to help you with your clients. Going on here. This reminded me of when I was about 12 and in family therapy with my mom and her abusive husband. Reminded me of 12 years old, family therapy with mom and abusive husband. So stepdad sounds like. After maybe 2 sessions, the family therapist said she thought it would be better if I did individual therapy and my mom and stepdad did couple therapy. And the therapist said she wanted to do the individual therapy with me and have my mom and stepdad go to couple therapy with one of her colleagues. Years later, my mom and I joked that she could just tell my stepdad was insufferable and didn't want to work with him, but who knows what really happened. I was wondering why a family therapist might decide to split up a family for treatment like that. And why might she have decided to continue to work with me, but not my mom and stepdad? End of email. Well, it's impossible to know, of course, but some candidates are that, and I think you can actually reach out to that family therapist and ask, by the way. You certainly are welcome to do that. I don't know if the family therapist would remember or respond, but you have that ability if you know the name of the therapist. But and they're still alive, presumably, and still have a practice. But the possibilities to this is that, I'm just imagining, because I've done this before, that I will be, I haven't done this specifically before, but something like this. Anyway, so I'm talking with parents, mom, stepdad, and daughter, 12, and there's a fair amount of conflict, and I might detect that the real problem lies in the parents' relationship and their conflict. I might even detect that the stepdad is insufferable and has an issue, maybe a personality disorder, and needs to be helped with that, and needs to be guided down a road of self-awareness and self-discovery so that he can learn to emotionally regulate and maybe engage in long-term corrective experiences to correct for the personality disorder. Well, if I thought that, I wouldn't think that the 12-year-old would need to be witness to all that work. There's a lot of parent talk and a lot of adult talk that would occur with the mom and the stepdad in the therapy office, and I wouldn't want to bother the 12-year-old, and I also just wouldn't want to expose a 12-year-old, and also I would want the parents to feel free to talk about anything that they wanted to talk about and not have to edit themselves in front of the 12-year-old. So separating those two groups would be helpful in that scenario. And then I could also imagine the family therapist maybe didn't do couple therapy and had a colleague that did it better, and might have thought, well, I don't want to just discard this 12-year-old. This 12-year-old needs support, needs someone in their corner. So I will take on the 12-year-old as my individual client, and I will refer the parents to my colleague who specializes in it. Or the therapist just wanted to keep it clean and ethical and didn't want it to muddy the waters by both treating the child, an individual, and the couple, the parents. So the therapist wisely thought, well, there's no reason not to refer, so I might as well, especially right in the beginning of treatment. And so we can get the best of both worlds that way. The couple, the parents can work on their relationship, and maybe the dad can start to work on his issues in couple therapy, and then I can help the daughter because she's suffering and she needs help, and then we'll work together, me and the other therapist, to help the family as a whole. So, that's just a guess. It could be dozens of other reasons. All right, let's take a break. We'll get back, more questions. All right, we're back from the break. This next email is kind of a juicy one that I don't know if I know the answer to, but It's from upper tier patron, anonymous upper tier patron from Cleveland. He says, I recently moved back in with my parents, temporarily with my wife and daughter, after being out of the house since I was a younger man. My sister and husband were also staying at the house. Due to a clash between my sister and my father, my sister has chosen to move out. How do I stay differentiated and not make things worse? I think the whole thing will eventually come up in conversation with both sides. End of email. I think that last sentence is referring to the fact that Anonymous from Cleveland believes that he's going to be having to navigate the conflict and be triangulated between his sister and his father. So I don't know the answer. I mean, it depends on what your sister's like, your father's like, the overall level of differentiation in your family, your pattern of triangulation, what you are willing to do, how you see the situation. But generally speaking, through triangulation, we want to navigate it with as much differentiation as possible. So things to do internally is to tell yourself and gain support, maybe in therapy, to really solidify the true notion that this is not your problem. This is a fight between your sister and your father. This is not a fight between your sister and you or your father and you. You weren't involved. You didn't cause anything. And so you want to differentiate from that yourself. The more you differentiate it from yourself, the more it is something that's outside of you, that is distant from you. I mean, it involves you. You're involved in the family, but you won't internalize, because the less differentiated we are, the more we will internalize it as something that involves us, something that threatens us. And then we get up in arms and fearful, and then we sort of insert ourselves in the situation, which and we insert ourselves out of desperation, not out of trying to help or anything. So, and that leads me to the second thing to differentiate is to figure out your feelings. What are you feeling? Because I would imagine you would feel worried that your family will fall apart, or worried that you'll be blamed, or worried that your sister or your father will think that you're taking the other side, and you're worried that your sister or your father will reject you because of that, or will spread rumors about you or something. It's normal kind of way to worry in a family. So you want to differentiate from that and say, like, well, those are normal feelings, but I'm not going to let them dominate. I'm not going to let them drive the car. I'm going to keep reasonable and try to stay reasonable. The next thing is you can develop any kind of strategy you want of detriangulation. I mean, one strategy is literally to stay out of it. You don't bring it up. When they bring it up, you change the subject, or you literally just tell them, I don't want to get into that with you. I just want to have if you're hanging out with your sister, you can just be like, look, I just want to spend the day with you. I don't want to talk about dad at all. Is that okay? You can do that. I don't know how your family would react to that. I don't know if you would want to do that. There's a lot of variables. But another way, and this is what I do because I can't help it, is I do want to talk about it with people, and I do kind of want to help. There is a thing that at least I conceptualize. I keep forgetting if I read this somewhere, or it's certainly not a dominant idea in my field, which is functional triangulation. I can be triangulated in a functional way. So say my sister comes to me and starts talking shit about my dad. Can you believe that bastard did d? And I'd listen and I'd support and I'd validate what I felt was okay for me to validate, but I wouldn't necessarily take her side. And I might say something like, yeah, I totally get it. Is it okay if I tell you what I think about it? And say my sister's up for it. And then I say, well, I totally get where you're coming from, and I understand. I would probably feel similarly if I were you. And I think what happened was there's just been a lot of misunderstanding. And yeah, dad can be a jerk face sometimes, for sure. And I think that the two of you just rub each other wrong, and you read each other wrong, and then you get triggered, each of you, and then you go after each other, and then it just escalates, and then actual bad things start happening, and each of you feel justified for it. I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not taking dad's side. From afar, it just looks like two people that are trying to be in a relationship with each other, but are just misunderstanding and triggering each other. So I don't know what I probably wouldn't say something so general as that. I'd probably be a lot more specific, not only to the conflict, but also to the human being. But it'd be something like that. I've had many conversations like that with people, whether it's in my personal life, at work. I've been triangulated at the university before. So that's what I would do. Now, it depends on a lot of things. Like, actually, there's this one moment where I did this with my friend Bob, who you might have heard on the podcast before. And this would have been, 25 years ago or something. And I took that approach. Bob was in a conflict with one of our friends, and it was a pretty big conflict. And I tried to functionally triangulate. I was hanging out with Bob. I'll never forget, we were in a parking lot in Northgate in Seattle, and I was thinking that Bob would be reasonable. And so I was trying to propose the other side of the, I was definitely on Bob's side, but I was also on the other person's side, and I was trying to help to relieve the conflict. But Bob did not take it well. He took actually great offense to it. I don't think I've ever seen him as angry as he was in this moment towards me. We've talked about this in the podcast before. And he has since apologized and realized that he was triggered greatly in that moment. And now we're all friends again and have been ever since. We've been friends with her for, since mid-90s, so 30 years. Dear friends of Bob's in particular. I'm friends with them as well, not as much as Bob is. But anyway, point is that you just never know. Like, there's a lot of things that you can't account for, and you just have to try your best. But the more differentiated you are, and I suppose looking back at that, what I didn't do well is I didn't know Bob had that much trauma and that much reactivity. I actually saw him, and still do to a large extent, as a very healthy person. I look up to him, particularly back then, when we were young. He's a few years older than me, and he had a lot more experience in psychology when we were in graduate school together. And so I think I just figured he could handle anything because he just seemed like that kind of person. But so I made that mistake of not knowing that, or not imagining that he might have those kinds of triggers. And I think the other mistake I made was I just sort of waded into it without considering the possibilities, without considering how he might feel. I think I just figured, well, because I think I even kind of confronted him a little bit. I think I said something like, well, Bob, you can be this way sometimes. You can be kind of ornery sometimes. Like I just sort of, just bludgeoned my way into the conversation, which I don't remember that. It was a long time ago, but I just imagine, knowing myself, particularly back then, I would imagine that would be true. I wasn't that way as a therapist, I hope, but with my friends, I probably was. And so I made those mistakes, and I should have just listened more. I should have been a better friend to him up front, but I wasn't. But on the plus side, I didn't take it personally. When he got triggered and he was really explosively angry at me, I didn't take it personally. I was differentiated from his explosion. I said, whoa, that doesn't have anything to do with me. I mean, sure, maybe I bludgeoned my way into this situation, but I wasn't that bad. And I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. And it turns out I was. In the end, Bob would agree with me in the end. And so I differentiated, meaning that if I had taken it personally and been more fused, more undifferentiated, I would have fought back. I would have maybe broken up with him as a friend or something. Like, how dare he do that? I just saw him like, whoa. And what helped was how explosive he was. I mean, he wasn't going to hit me or anything, but it was rage. And it was so noticeably out of character and out of context that I thought, whoa, this must have to do with something else that we're not actually talking about right now. And I didn't take it personally. So that helped to repair the situation, at least between me and Bob. And to get into triangulation language, there was a conflict, tension between Bob and our friend. And because the tension was so high, that the tension shifted between Bob and Beth, and now Bob and me. But because I exhibited differentiation along this level, the tension dissipated. I didn't transfer, like a classic undifferentiated move would be that I would go to Beth and I'd be like, "Can you believe Bob? What a jerk face. Like, he yelled at me the other day," and talk shit about him behind his back. And then that would kind of transfer the tension back to Bob and Beth, because Beth might feel responsible for the fact that Bob yelled at me or something, and then it would just keep the anxiety rolling. But it just ended with me. The tension came at me and I didn't take it personally. And I didn't continue to triangulate and engage in undifferentiated mindset and behavior. Another thing that I did was I learned about this issue, and the next time we talked about it, I just listened. I didn't press it. So there was that. So yeah, to answer your question, Anonymous in Cleveland, I think it depends, and you have to navigate it pretty carefully. One of the things that I do in situations like this where I don't know is I might even, so let's say I'm hanging out with my dad and I'm in a situation like this, and I'm just like, "Hey Dad, I love you a lot, and if I could, I'd be on your side, but I also don't want to reject my sister. I love her too. I love you guys equally, and I don't know what to do. I have my opinions, I guess, but it pains me to see the two of you in conflict, and I don't want to take sides. So when you talk about my sister negatively, I'm conflicted. On one hand, I love you and I want to side with you and I want to agree with you. But on the other hand, I love my sister and I don't want to throw her under the bus. So I don't know what to do. And I'm just kind of stuck in this weird place. But I love you both, and I hope the two of you work it out. I don't know if you will. Okay, so I think that would work, right? I mean, you say something like that, at least you would hope that your dad, or if you said that to your sister, that they would understand, and that could be the foundation upon which you move forward. You know what I mean? So to use differentiation language in that role play that I just said, I am differentiated in that I can look at my fears and I can look at my worries and I can look at all the different emotions and fears that I have, and I can evaluate them and make a decision as to what I want to do with them, how I want to communicate them. Whereas if I'm fused and undifferentiated and I'm just ruled by those fears, what I might do is I might actually yell at my dad and say, "It's all your fault." Or I might completely side with my dad, but then when I see my sister, I might completely side with her because I'm afraid of them rejecting me and I'm afraid of the situation. I don't know what to do. I'm confused. I'm pulled in two different directions. And since I don't have a differentiated sort of view from above, I'm just swimming in the emotions and reacting out of fear and not out of any kind of bigger plan. So if you're differentiated, you can look at your emotions, value them, and say, okay, well, what do I do with this? I don't want to do that. I don't want to side with both of them. And then when they find out I sided with both of them, they'll both think I'm fake or something. Plus that might fuel the conflict between the two of them if I agree with both of them, or if I agree with one, I get rejected by the other. But really what's happening here is I'm just afraid for the two of them. I'm afraid that I'm going to get rejected by each of them because I don't side with them. So I'm going to tell them that. I'm going to own those feelings, and I'm going to communicate it in a non-blaming way and non-hostile way. So by doing that, that is differentiation. You're valuing your emotions, you're looking at them, you're making a plan, you're enacting the plan. It's a rational plan. It's a plan that, at least to you in the moment, makes sense, greater sense than just reacting in the moment. All right, this next email is from upper tier patron Josh from England. He says, "What is your opinion on the advice and messages of the self-improvement channel on YouTube called Think Before You Sleep? From what I have seen, they seem to provide solid advice to their audience and make a lot of valid points. However, they receive a ton of hate for some of their judgments on people's psychology and predicting human behavior. I would love to hear your criticisms of the points, or if you approve of them and their judgment and advice. P.S. You are the fucking man." End of email. So are you, Josh. I'd never heard of this channel before, so I looked it up just now, and there's a lot of videos and a lot of views on the videos, and I didn't have a lot of time, so I clicked on the one about 90 Day Fiancé since I know about that topic. It was made 3 years ago, and it has 1.5 million views so far. And it's called Why Simps Won't Listen. And I watched just the first few minutes of it. So I'm sorry, Josh, I'm not so much the man right now in that I haven't watched much of it. So it sounds like there's a lot of opinions that he's given, a lot of advice, a lot of ideas. And so I'll take your word for it that some of it is solid advice and some of it is valid points. But the first point that the individual makes is that everyone on 90 Day Fiancé, all the non-Americans, are only in it for the green card. I can't remember exactly the quoted statement, but they were saying that, of course, everyone from another country is just trying to get a visa because they're not getting paid to be on the show or something like this. And they're showing Danielle and Mohammed clips in the video, so I suppose that's the one couple that you could validly, in my book anyway, wage that accusation or speculation, because we'll never know. But certainly that's not founded. That isn't a proven point. Plus, there are so many other data points pointing in other directions on the show. Plenty of people have stayed, like Elizabeth and Andre, for example. They're still in a relationship after years. Do we think that Andre was just on the show because he wanted to get a visa? So I don't know, but I was like, I'll watch a little bit of this, and then I just heard him say that, and I thought, ugh. So I don't know. I'll take your word for it that there's some great points in there. But the other thing is people sometimes ask me to comment on other people's YouTube channels, and often there are channels that are pretty controversial and have a lot of points in them that are pretty easily refuted. And I would hope that people would understand that the points are either made in jest or they're just not very scientific statements. They're just opinions. I hope that people understand that. Plus, I don't have the time necessarily to do all those kinds of things. Also, I don't know if people really care about me doing that kind of stuff. Sometimes I'll do that and not a lot of people watch it. The other thing is I don't want to get in some kind of YouTube war with another YouTuber for a variety of reasons. It's just not my kind of thing. And so I don't know. In a perfect world, I'd be able to have 10 clones that could do all this stuff, and one of my clones would actually watch all these videos and comment on it, and it wouldn't cause emotional strife, meaning that there wouldn't be an online war, because I'm just going to guess and say that this individual's fans, think before you sleep person, has a lot of very invested fans, maybe even such as yourself, Josh. And if I were to criticize even slightly, say I watch it and 90% of it I'm on board with and 10% I'm not, I'm just going to take a guess and say that would not be a good day on YouTube for me. that I'd get a lot of attack, maybe even threats like I've been before. It's pretty scary. I'm trying to keep my family safe, and people could figure out where I live or where I work or track me down, and it's just something I'd rather not do in my life for the clicks. I might watch it just casually just to see what other people are saying, but yeah, that's what I'll say about that. All right, let's take a break there. Actually, let's make the rest of this episode just for patrons of the podcast. I am looking forward to these other emails, and I think I'm going to get into some sensitive political areas, so I think it's best if I just isolate this episode, the rest of this episode, for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to hear the rest of this episode, become a patron of the podcast. Do it now. Support us if you want to, only if you can afford it. And everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.